B is actually trying to put a pressure on A by using some sort of external threat, which is not good, which is not considered to be a free consent. Situated in a zone where we try to just understand others through confidence, through certain factors, and we believe that everything is going to go in a good manner. Section 18 defines misrepresentation means truth is misrepresented. Good morning and welcome to the third session in Unit 2 Commercial Law, where we are going to talk about the free consent. Now, what do you mean by the word consent? In Indian Contract Act, the definition of consent is given under the section 14, which states that it is when two or more persons agree upon the same thing and in the same sense. Very, very important definition. Why? Because two or more people, so the people who are part of the contract agree on the same thing in the same sense. So both of them have understood the meaning of what they are going to do and in the same context, in the same meaning. The 99% of the time what happens here is that we might agree, but we try to agree things on a different context altogether. So that's why a consent is required, so that we are trying to understand, are we on the same page? That is why this consent factor matters a lot. Let us have a quick look at the example here where it tries to say that you are trying to sell a house to B. So A is trying to sell a house to B. A owns 3 houses and wants to sell his house in the place called as Haridwar. Now, B thinks he is buying his Delhi house. That starts the confusion. Here, A and B have not agreed upon the same thing, because A was actually trying to sell the house, one of his 3 houses, which is located in the city called Haridwar. But B is thinking that A is going to sell his house, which is located in Delhi. So here, the consensus are not arrived. Consent will be arrived only and the same point, only at the point where both of them have agreed upon the same factor. So therefore, when there is a change altogether, when there is a difference of opinion altogether, then consensus have not been arrived at all. So that's why we try to say here very clearly that consent can be arrived only when both the parties have understood on the factor clearly and they have come upon the same lines. Now, coercion, this is a very, very important factor. If you just have a look into the diagram there, the picture that's been given on the slide, quite a interesting slide, interesting photo, which you commonly see in movies, you see in dramas and all those factors, but then this happens in life also. Coercion. Section 15 of the Indian Contract Act 1852 states that coercion is committing or threatening to commit any act which is forbidden by the Indian Penal Code, which means now I'm going to put a gun to your head and say that you have to do it. So I'm trying to force you to do something which is banned under the Indian Penal Code. So what if I take a gun and put on your head and say, sign the document immediately or I will kill you? Now when I put that threatening zone altogether, I'm trying to commit a mistake. I'm trying to commit a crime. I'm not trying to get the contract signed under the normal circumstances. So that's where coercion comes into picture, which means it's an unlawful way of doing things. That is very, very important. So if you look at the Indian Penal Code of 45 in the 1860, which says that very, very clearly that unlawful detaining comes into position. This is what normally happens in any of the situation when you desperately want some activity to be done. You want a property to come to your name, or you know that there is some asset available illegal, which you want to take it by force by putting somebody under a pressure zone altogether. So that is where we would say that there is some kind of pressure, there is some kind of activity that is pushing us to do things which is actually considered to be a coercion. Why? Because that intention of getting things done without taking the permission, without even understanding what is going on, coercion is coming into picture. Now, this is one scenario. Why I'm trying to say here is that this kind of agreement is not permitted. This kind of agreement actually leads to a void situation, leads to a position where the agreement or the contract itself can be tomorrow declared as a null situation altogether. Now, normally people ask this, how will the court even identify it? Suppose the person who was pushed into the contract is able to go back with the evidence to the court of law and prove that I was pushed into this agreement by some pressure, by some threatening situation altogether, then automatically the agreement becomes completely null altogether. So that's why it is very, very important for all of us to understand at this juncture very clearly that this kind of agreement shall not be considered to be a good one. Now, the next thing is that coercion means forcing an individual to enter into a contract. Why will you force somebody into a contract? Now, that is quite interesting for all of us to understand here. Why are you forcing somebody to get into contract? That is because you feel that this contract cannot be done in a normal way or a mean. So that's where you want this contract to be done under pressure. You know that a particular agreement cannot be arrived at consensus at a normal zone by using the terms and conditions. So what you want to do? Now you want to pressurize. You want to put a threatening situation altogether. So you say that, sir, please put them under a threatening zone, under a threatened factor altogether. You put him under some sort of pressure and you want to get the contract signed in your favor. So when the intimidation or threats are used, pressure to gain parties' consent, it is not a free consent, which means to say that he has not wholeheartedly accepted for that particular agreement, for that particular contract. But what you are trying to do, you are just pushing him. You are trying to say that, okay, do it or you will face consequences. So this kind of factor is not considered at all. Now, coercion may involve an actual infliction of physical or psychological harm to enhance the credibility of a threat. Now, we are going to the physical and psychological factor. Now, what is the physical and psychological factor that one has to understand? Which means either I can physically harm you or mentally threaten you that I will be doing this particular activity. So this becomes quite important for all of us to understand that there is some sort of threatening factor that comes into picture. Now, what is that some sort of threatening factor that we are trying to talk about, that we are trying to understand all here? What we want to see is that we want to see that the person is being put into a lot of threatening zone altogether. He is being put into a factor of thought process where they say that the person can be psychologically put into further kinds of afflictions or further kinds of torture altogether. The threat can further lead into a threatened person's cooperation or obedience. Since you have put him under pressure, since you have put him under a threatening zone altogether, now this person will feel that, sir, I'm going to be harmed. I'm going to be challenged altogether. Now, A went out for a walk. B approaches A with a stranger, pulls out his gun and asks A to give all his possession. The consent of A is to obtain a coercion there. It's a very simple thing. Now, moment you see people that they use a gun or they use a weapon, they use any kind of external factors in order to put a pressure on you and obtain any kind of position, any kind of agreement altogether, that is considered to be a coercion. That is considered to be a threat altogether. So at any given point of time, when you're going to consider A and B factor here, both of them, B is actually trying to put a pressure on A by using some sort of external threat, which is not good, which is not considered to be a free consent. Now, moving further, undue influence. What do you mean by this word undue influence? The word itself tries to say that you are trying to use some sort of pressure, threat, or some sort of modulation here so that you will be able to get what exactly you want. So let us try to understand this factor clear. According to Section 16 of the Indian Contract Act of 1872, an influence will be considered as undue influence when, under this situation, one party to the contract is in a position of trust and controls the other party wrongfully. This word has to be understood clear because that is important. Now, what I'm trying to do is that I have the power, I have the position to control the other people, and I misguide them. I take them on to the wrong situation, trying to influence their mind, asking them to sign the contract, but that is on the negative side altogether. Second thing is that since I am powerful, I am using my dominant position to gain an unfair advantage over the other. I'm using my dominance, I'm using my position, I'm using my power by saying that you need to listen to me better or else there might be kind of other situations. What I'm trying to do here is that I'm using two factors here. One, out of my position, out of my trust factor, I am trying to take you apart from the contract. I'm trying to misguide you. I'm trying to say that this contract, these factors have to happen according to my mind process, according to my thought process, and not according to anybody else. So in that sense, now what is happening is that I'm trying to put you under a pressure zone altogether. The next thing is that you need to understand there are two key elements of this undue influence. One is called as the relationship. What is the relationship? The trust, the confidence, and the authority. Now these three things are very, very important for us to understand. Why? Because the relationship between that persons who are getting into the contract is basically on trust, on the confidence, on the authority. So you know about it, you are confident about it, you might be considered to be an expert in that area. So the relationship is built on trust, confidence, and authority. But what is the other factor? The unfair persuasion, that is a careful examination of the terms of the contract. Now when I say the word careful consideration factors, that means I am trying to put you onto a situation where you are not actually ready, but I'm trying to influence your mind. I'm trying to put you back into a situation which is actually negative, but I am trying to gain something beneficial out of it. So this is where the undue influence comes into picture. Moving further, where one party is fiduciary relation to the other party. Now fiduciary relation means relationship of trust and confidence. When a person imposes faith and confidence on other, he expects not to be betrayed. Now let's say in a very simple example, I have a trust on my friend. So based on the trust, based on the belief factor, I am taking him into confidence and I want to buy a house, I want to buy a land, I want to do some business with him. So what do I do here is that I am taking him into confidence 100%. So now I expect that my friend should not come forward, cheat me for any reason. So I don't want at any given instance that the business goes wrong because of the lack of trust. The next thing is that if the other party betrays the confidence or trust reposed, then it comes into an undue influence altogether. Now, if my friend takes that trust benefit into an unfair, advantageous position altogether, starts cheating me altogether, and what happens here is that he gains an undue advantage altogether because of that factor, and then he puts me into an undue influence situation. This is quite interesting and important for all of us to know. Why? Because we are all situated in a zone where we try to just understand others through confidence, through certain factors, and we believe that everything is going to go in a good manner. But suddenly you come back and you see that things have gone wrong. That's where you feel that I have been cheated because I have trusted somebody so badly, I have trusted somebody so closely, and this person has led me to this situation. This is quite nominal in our day-to-day examples. Why? Because many people believe their friends and they start investing in some plans, in some schemes, and finally you see that the company runs away with the money, or you put some money into some sort of a trust or in some sort of a bank. Suddenly the bank closes. Now what happens is that that person, the victim, comes back and says that, sir, I started the scheme or I started putting money into that deposit because my friend told that the bank was excellent. They were paying very good returns. But unfortunately today when I go back and see that things are not true, they've gone away from my confidence, they've gone away from the factors altogether. So that's why I say that this fiduciary relationship is very, very important when you are examining a contract. Now, moving further, the examples of fiduciary includes the solicitor and the client, trustee and the trust, spiritual advisor and devotee, medical assistant, attendant and patient, parent and child, husband and wife. Now, if you look all these kind of factors, these are all purely built upon trust. These are not having anything which is like, pure legal or pure technical in nature, but these are all relationship which is built out of the trust factor, out of the emotions factor altogether. So when you are going to play with the emotions on the wrong side, you are going to take the emotions for any kind of speculative manner, then automatically it leads to a negative factor altogether. Now, for example, a doctor tries to bring in a patient mindset with amount of hope, trust. For a patient, when he looks into a doctor, he is like a living form of God. But then, if the doctor tries to play with the patient's mindset and tries to do something wrong, the entire fraternity, the entire concept of trust on the medical system goes away. So that is why you need to be very, very careful in what you are trying to guide others. How are you going to give this advice and how are you going to take them forward? Now, what happens here is that for a client, when he believes on his lawyer, or for a person who is believing on the trust, or for a parent and child, a husband and wife, or when you're talking about spiritual advisors and devotees, these are all relationship where you see that it is built on a very great trust factor. You cannot measure that trust. You cannot quantify it. You cannot say that it is only up to this extent altogether. But then, when the trust factor breaks away because of a wrong intention that has been put in, then automatically the entire system collapses. That is why it is very important for all of us to understand over a period of time the entire concept of relationship, the entire concept of doing certain things are very, very important. Now, when one party in a fiduciary relation is, again, we consider with master and servant, the guardian and ward. The other words, we say that this undue influence occurs when the decision of one party in transaction can be influenced by the other party. So this is a lot of factor that involves in that. Sometimes in our country, we also say that people come under the influence of caste, creed, religion in terms of voting for selecting their leaders altogether in an election. That should not happen actually. Election or voting is primarily to give your right a thought process. You need to take that call based on your decision, but you should not come under the influence of somebody and vote. So that's exactly what we are trying to say here. The power of decision making is being snatched away. Somebody is influencing you. Somebody is guiding you by telling that, yes, you can do this. Yes, you can do this word in this way. So automatically you are carried away. You are not thinking. You're not applying your brain. You're not happy about that situation. You just want to go ahead, believe some person blindly and take over that position, which is not considered to be good here. Now let's look at an example. A sold his gold ring to his teacher B for rupees 200, and after he has been offered good grades by his teacher. Now A permission is not given freely. He was influenced by his teacher. Just look at the situation. Just for the sake of obtaining marks, this person, the student, goes ahead and sells his gold ring for him. That cannot be accepted at all. Why? Because for a student to obtain marks, it should be on his merit factor altogether. That should be on his quality, that should be on his capacity of earning the marks, and not by giving a sort of bribe to the teacher. That is not considered to be good at all. So this is where the undue influence comes. I try to put the other party in some kind of a situation where I say that if this work has to happen, you need to satisfy these terms and conditions. So this undue influence is a very, very important factor when it comes to the contract. Now, the next thing is fraud. What is a fraud factor altogether? Why is the fraud factor very, very important when we are speaking? Now, according to Section 17 of the Indian Contract Act, fraud includes any of the following acts committed by the contracting party on its convenience or in its target in order to deceive, induce a party or agent who has entered into the contract. The effective concealment of a fact by one when he is aware. What is fraud altogether? If I have to put it in a very simple term, is that it is an intentional act to cheat somebody. I know that this is wrong, but my intention is that through cheating somebody, I'm going to gain. So that's where I intend to commit a fraud act, a fraudulent act altogether. Promise made without any intention to carry it out. Yes, so I have made a promise so that I am going to break it. So that's why I'm taking it. Any other act fitted to be deceiving in nature. So I'm going to deceive you. I'm going to put you to a situation where I'm going to say that yes, this person needs to be cheated, needs to be put under some kind of fact. So there is an intention from my side where I want to cheat you, where I want to put you under some position, some zone altogether where you will be cheated by me. So that is why I am putting you under the fact that any other fact, that is to be deceiving you, that is to put you under some kind of a threat zone altogether. Any such act or omission as the law considers to be fraudulent, where you have intentionally hidden something, intentionally, which is considered to be fraudulent, and then you are going to put me under that particular situation. So the law says very, very clearly, in this case, in this scenario, it will be considered as fraudulent, as something which is not good in nature. So what we are trying to do here is that we are trying to understand a very clear-cut situation that somebody wants to cheat the other person and make a benefit out of it. Now, moving further, mere silence as to facts likely to affect a person's willingness to enter into a contract is not fraud, unless the circumstances of case are such that having regard to them, it is an obligation of the silent person to speak, or unless his or her silence itself is equivalent to that speech. Now, mere silence, we are just being party to the situation, is not considered to be a fraud unless and until the circumstance need to it. Now, let's try to understand by an example. A sells his horse to B by auction, which A knows to be unsound. The horse is not in proper condition. A tells B nothing about the unsoundness of the horse. This is fraud on the part of A. Now you are able to understand that I know that when I'm selling a particular object or a particular item that is not of good nature, that already has a defect, that already has some problem, but I am concealing that entire ideology to that person to whom I'm going to sell, that is an intentional fraud. That I shouldn't have done it. I should have clearly gone ahead and told the person that, sir, there is a problem here. Please listen up to the problem clearly before getting into that factor. But what I do here is that I intentionally hide it. I don't want the person to know it because I want to commit a fraud. If that is going to be proven, if that is going to be told very clearly, then it's considered to be a fraud factor. Next thing, misrepresentation. What is a misrepresentation? Means that the truth is misrepresented. What is the truth is being told in a wrong way, or it is not being given at all. So that's why section 18 defines misrepresentation means truth is misrepresented. That means release of deceiving details resulting in the presumption that the other party shall enter into the deal and then lose. That means I portray a wrong picture altogether. Something else has to be told on the place I conceal it, misrepresent the entire factor so that the other person gets into it and he loses the deal. So this is a misrepresentation, portraying a wrong picture about the contract. Nevertheless, the information provided by the guilty party is the result of a genuine belief in the matter, then misrepresentation is said to be committed. Whatever I have shown to the other person, that person believes it to be genuine and he understands me, he takes me into confidence, he believes that the wrong information to be right, then automatically a misrepresentation is committed from my side altogether. Now, moving further, firstly, when the deceiving person declares that no justified data is misleading a person in some way. So I am just going to justify the wrong information itself as the right one. So tomorrow when that person comes and asks, I am not going to tell the truth, I am just going to go forward and say that this is the right thing, you need to believe me. So the opposite side believes on me and takes it into picture. Followed, there is a breach of obligation that has been caused on a basis of bias by the other. Lastly, the mistake is committed by a person because misrepresentation of act and information. So you are able to understand clearly here that I have been trying to cheat on the information. I am not showing a clarified image, a clarity in the picture at all. I just want to take away that clarity. I don't want to show the truth factor. I just want to hide it, conceal it, and just give it forward so that the person who gets into the contract here is definitely going to lose, is definitely going to make some sort of a negative instance altogether. Followed by an example which we are going to see here. A told B that his radio is in good condition because of the confidence factor that B has got on A. Now, B bought the radio from him. The radio did not work properly. After some time, B thought that he was misled by A. But A believed his radio was in very good condition and had no intention of deceiving him. So A proves to be innocent here. So here misrepresentation is in the part of A because he did not know the radio was working there. Now what has happened is that he is not an intentional fraud. Please understand the situation that A thought that the radio was working very well and that's why he sold the radio to B. But then now A understands that the radio was not actually working. Now it is not on the part of A that he has committed a fraud, but it's a misrepresentation. He has not been able to picture it out clearly. He thought that it was in a good condition, but actually the radio is not in a good condition. This is where the misrepresentation comes because you have thought and you have given the wrong picture altogether. Now the next thing is mistake. There are two forms of mistake that we are going to talk about. The mistake of fact, the mistake of law. So according to the Indian Contract Act, there are two kinds of mistake that we are going to understand. One is called as a mistake of fact, the other one is called as the mistake of law. Now, mistake of fact arises when both of the contracting parties have misunderstood the essential meaning of the contract. Such a mistake can be done due to confusion. Mistake is never intentional in nature. It's an innocent thing. Both of us have misunderstood. You told me something, I understood something, then automatically a mistake of fact has happened. This can be either unilateral or bilateral, which means both of us are in that particular position. Now, a mistake of law is something where it has been under the section of the act altogether. Now, a unilateral mistake occurs when only one party to the contract makes a mistake. The contract will not be a void in such case. It is being specified under the section 22 of the act that the contract will not be considered to be a void because one party has made a mistake. Only if one party has made a mistake of the contract, it still remains valid because the other side has been correct. So what happens is that if one person has made a unilateral mistake, then we will not consider it to be a void contract. Now, unilateral mistake, let's look into an example. A enters an agreement with B for a purchase of horse, which he assumes to be a racing horse. A does not confirm B about it from that factor. Now, in actual, a horse is not a racing horse. Horse is just an animal. A cannot resign from the contract. Now, A cannot go back and say, I will not purchase. He has assumed something. What we have believed here is that horse is a horse. Horse doesn't exactly have to be a racing horse. So, in this condition, A cannot come out from the contract. The next one is the mistake of law, which is very, very important. That is mistake from the Indian laws or from the mistake of the foreign laws. If the mistake applies to the Indian laws, the principle is that law's ignorance is not sufficiently good excuse. This means to say either party cannot claim that he is unaware of the law. Now, you cannot say that, sir, I did not know that when I buy a vehicle, I should have also have the driving license. That cannot be an excuse at all. If you are buying a vehicle, you also need to have the license to drive that vehicle. So that's exactly where we are bringing the law into picture. With this, I come to the conclusion of this particular session. I hope and believe that all the information shared here will be of a great use and resource to you. In the upcoming sessions, we shall try to understand the further different factors of the contract law. Until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.